We had to have somebody who could do a true eulogy, a true accolade to our pal Quincy. And we're fortunate here today because we've got his longtime friend, business core, pal, Stevie Allan, and Stevie's going to give it to us. Steve. All the time you want.
Thanks, Webby. Watch your step. Well, thanks very much, Webb. I knew this was going to be a big crowd, but unbelievable. What a crowd. What a tribute, an awesome show of love for our good pal Quincy, and a wonderful show of support for Susan Crawford, Quincy's nieces, H. Crockett, Megan Woods and Shannon Woods, and nephew Brenton Smith. Thank you all for coming. I know some people traveled across town, but we have people that came from New York, from Edmonton, from Vancouver. I saw Derek Lloyd this morning. He'd gone to Florida to take his winter break, and he came back for this. So thank you all for coming from wherever you came from. I also want to recognize Jigs and Kent sitting down here at the front. They were They were Quincy's caregivers over the last several months, 10 months, I think, including the last few weeks at the Rocky View. They were with him every day, got him up and moving, ran him through his exercises, and built a wonderful, warm bond with them. So thank you, gentlemen. That was very special. Quincy and I were both big believers in relatively short memorial ceremonies. So Susan, as you know, asked that I be the only speaker. It's a daunting task. But an enormous honor. Quincy had so many friends and associates from vastly different walks of life, many of whom would love to be able to share their stories, and there is a lot of material to deal with. I'm going to do my best to properly honor Quincy and hopefully touch on things that you will relate to, and bring out captures the essence of his character and the importance of him to each one of us. We aren't going to have an open mic, but I would encourage you all to share your stories with one another and take the time to pass them on to Susan. I started out by thinking I was going to be brief, but the more I worked on it, the longer this little piece got. And Quincy was constantly admonishing me to keep my written and verbal comments on any particular subject brief. I seldom managed to meet his expectations in that regard, and I regret that I'm unable to do that today. There's so much material here, so I hope you'll bear with me. The good news is that many of these things, you have 3 or 4 speakers and it takes over an hour. I'm not going to take that long, but it's going to be probably longer than you would like. I hope to tell you a few stories about Quincy that will highlight his incredible skill as one of Canada's foremost insolvency lawyers, as well as his enormous contributions to our community. In doing so, I hope to highlight his personal qualities which made him so successful in every initiative in which he was involved. He was insightful. He had an amazing ability to quickly grasp the heart of any problem or issue. He would then apply incredible ingenuity and creativity to identifying solutions or seizing opportunities. He wrapped all of these skills and talents with a wonderful sense of humor and a manner that immediately put people at ease. None of what I have to say today is about me, but our lives were so intertwined, and therefore so are our stories. I'll give you a little bit of background so you understand how we came to be so closely connected. We first met at Rideau Park Junior High School. Quincy was one of the cool guys in grade 9, and I was in grade 7. He went on to Central High School, and that's the original one on 13th Avenue and 8th Street, and I followed a couple of years later. I was invited to join the Delta Rho fraternity, which included Quincy and other lifelong friends, Rick Lyle, Rob Peters, Jimmy Miles, Rick Anderson, Pat Peacock, and several others. And if you have a chance, take a look at the picture on the table out front of the Delta Rho circa 1959, I think it is. Quincy then went off to the University of Montana in Missoula after high school, and then on to the U of A. We reunited when I was in first year commerce at U of A, and he was in first year law. Quincy was a member of Phi Delta Theta in Missoula, and so became part of the chapter at U of A. I joined the Phi Delphs as a new pledge. The fraternity had a mentoring program, and Quincy was assigned to be my big brother. In retrospect, that was serendipitous, as Quincy and I have been like brothers for these past 60 years. I came back to Calgary after first year and attended USC, but we saw each other at various parties and other occasions. We didn't connect as frequently, too frequently until after I graduated. I played rugby a little bit at university, and Quincy and many other friends were playing with some of the established teams in Calgary, including the Rams, the Saracens, the Saints, and the Hornets. Quincy was frustrated that there were lots of good Calgary-born and bred athletes who weren't being attracted to rugby, but who possessed athletic skills, so he set about to establish a team with a more Canadian approach to the game. And he founded the Canucks Rugby Club in 1968. According to a recent Instagram post by the Canucks in Quincy's memory, his vision for the club was to provide a competitively tough team on the field and a distinct social atmosphere that fosters friendship. I can tell you at that time, 50 some odd years ago, it was successful, and that remains the club's vision today. The Canucks has indeed turned into a rugby powerhouse, with what I understand is the best junior development program in Calgary for boys and girls. It now has 3 men's senior teams, 2 women's teams, and junior programs for girls and boys ages 4 to 18, and has many volunteer coaches throughout Calgary's high schools. A few of us attended the 50th anniversary of the Canucks a few years ago, and there's a book about the Canucks back on that table on the entrance that includes details of Quincy's role, the establishments of the club. There's a picture of some of us old-timers in there, and a great picture of Quincy, the founder. John Holmes, who has a long history with the Canucks, recently wrote, "I don't think Quincy realized what he was creating at the time, but the Canucks Rugby Club has become one of the premier rugby clubs in Alberta, having sent several players to Canada's national teams. His legacy will live on forever with the club's unique style of rugby and camaraderie." One of the original Canucks noted, "I recall Quincy playing third division fullback, and if he's playing third division, this was in his 40s, I think, and he was basically retired as a player. I think I was there that day. We went back for kind of a reunion. He said, I recall Quincy playing third division fullback with a big old cigar in his mouth. He was a beauty." Both Quincy's and my parents were members of this golf club, and so we played as juniors and intermediates. When the opportunity presented itself, we became shareholders and played countless games together over the years with so many of our other good pals. At some point in the 1980s, a guy named Rourke Hilford, some of you might remember, has strong and unusual political views, and he owned my favorite ice cream shop in Altadore, branded Quincy and me as the buzzards of bad business. I don't recall what prompted this, but it delighted our golfing buddies like Vance and Fred and Lorne and the Kaiser and Jock whenever they had the opportunity to throw the balls up and pair themselves against us to get a chance to play the buzzards. Quincy and I were in the golf committee together in the 70s or 80s and we started some of the gentlemen's evenings, which are still being played each year. My favorite tournament, which was initiated by Quincy, was the Polish Open. It was basically a party on the golf course. There were bars set up about every 3 holes. You wore goofy costumes, and there were different creative and unique rules for scoring, like you had to score the highest score on one hole, or challenging but fun shots required, such as miniature golf type obstacles on the greens. But there was a hole-in-one prize on the 8th hole. You had to drive over an old wreck of a car, and if you got a hole-in-one, you won the wreck. Fortunately, I don't think anybody ever won it. Now, I don't know how they got in and out of the golf course. Some of you might remember Bill Tynan and Don Cushing, who had a history on the courtesy car committee that we'll touch on, but they dressed up as Hutterites and carried rubber chickens strapped to their belts. Many of the staff at the club, including Chris, who may be here today, were Polish. So Maria and Chris and other wonderful members of the staff made cabbage rolls and pierogies and joined right into the event. Quincy was on the board of the club for several years, about 10 years ago, and contributed his governance skills and common sense to the board, but sadly he was unable to resurrect the Polish Open. We had many laughs over the years in playing the garachi. That's the golden nectar of the gods invitational. It was one of Quincy's favorite annual events. We played in Banff for several years until a couple of players got thrown in jail for a few hours. Come here, Davey. Lips are sealed. So we moved the tournament to Whitefish, where they were a little more hospitable. We also had many great times and many laughs in the annual Cinco de Mayo tournament in Phoenix, which is organized by Gary Cook. Some incredible times and wonderful group of buddies. And there are many veterans of the Garachi and the Cinco de Mayo here today. Great, great memories. Quincy was an excellent golfer, at one time a single-digit handicap. To my knowledge, the last time he played was on July 15th. It was a mini Central High School reunion, as our old pal Bonnie Bickle Russell was in town. So Nancy Peters organized a few other high school buddies, Webby and Diane Williams, Helen Miles, Quincy, and me to play. Quincy could still hit the ball very well, and certainly better than me, despite his medical challenges. Quincy was also an amazing skier. He learned to ski on Christchurch Hill in Elbow Park. I'm told he used to wear his ski boots to school and then head over to the Christchurch Hill afterwards. And ultimately, he parlayed that into skiing in the best hills throughout North America and Europe. He skied 2 or 3 times this past winter, and although I was unable to join him, I understand he was still skiing very well. Quincy also loved to hunt. It was an annual tradition for him and his buddies to go to Joe Stewart's hotel in Patricia for the opening of pheasant season, and a bit later in the season, there were goose and duck hunting expeditions near Strathmore. Susan said the camaraderie was more important than the catch, and I don't think he dared bring the catch home for cleaning. Quincy invited me to go hunting with them once, but I nearly blew my foot off, so I wasn't invited back. Quincy was one of the organizers of the Hamburger Hockey League, and I know there's a few of you here this afternoon. But a great bunch of friends who were all pretty good hockey players. I didn't play hockey, but Quincy wanted me to be involved. They had an annual black tie awards dinner. I was at Price Waterhouse at the time. So in a manner similar to the Academy Awards, players voted on an array of awards like Player of the Year, Most Improved, and submitted their ballots to me. As the designated league auditor, I therefore attended the dinner as the man from Price Waterhouse to hand the envelope announcing the awards winners to the MC. And that was a Quincyism too, getting me. That's how we got me involved as a guy who couldn't play hockey. And there's a great picture of a black tie dinner to the Hamburger Hockey League on the table out there too. Professionally, Quincy started out at McKimmie Matthews, then joined his longtime pal Rick Lyle and Norm Mackey in practice at Mackey, Lyle, and Smith. Subsequently, they merged their practice with Blair Mason. I just saw that Blair just passed away this past week. And the practice became Mason, McLeod, Lyle, Smith. The late 1980s, the Supreme Court decided in favor of national law firms. Quincy and Rick became hot commodities as they had specialist practices that were in demand and were both native Calgarians. They were getting lots of offers to become part of a national firm, which ultimately led them to the Fennerty firm, which evolved into Fraser Milner Casgrain. Quincy built an enormously successful insolvency practice there and ultimately became managing partner of the Calgary office. Not only did he navigate the relocation of the FMC office to its current location at Bankers Court, but he was part of the management team that advanced the Denton's merger internationally. At the same time, on the local office front, he created the Chuck Wagon program, which ran for a decade. He invited clients to a BYOC, that's Bring Your Own Car, event at Race City Speedway. I saw some of the pictures up there, and I was there. It was a blast. And he put a pool table in one of the boardrooms, which I am guessing is no longer there. He also took pity on me. There was extra office space in Bankers Court, so he gave me an office when I retired around 2010, which I maintained until COVID, and caused great confusion amongst people in the office who wondered who the hell this old guy was up there. In the late 1970s, I decided I wanted to pursue the insolvency business. And there was a requirement for practical experience, and one had to sit for a written as well as an oral exam. My firm didn't have an insolvency practice, so I approached Quincy to see if he would mentor me, which he readily agreed to do. We managed to pick up a few training wheel type files to provide me with some experience. I passed the written exam and then had to sit for the oral exam. The examiners included a bureaucrat from the Superintendent of Bankruptcy Office, who also had to invite a local lawyer to assist with the oral exam. As you might guess, Quincy was chosen to be that guy. Quincy and the official receiver, as the individual was known, decided that I passed, but that I should start out on small files. Quincy had other plans. He'd been approached to be involved in the Abacus Cities file. He needed an accounting guy, and that was to be me. And at the time, Abacus was the largest bankruptcy in Canadian history. Ultimately, other firms became involved. Keith Rolfe of Deloitte was appointed to act for the client developers, which is the group that Quincy and I were helping informally. And Thorne Riddell, which became KPMG, were appointed as trustees of the company. And indicating the high regard in which Quincy was held, Harold Fisher and Bob Sanderson, both of KPMG, made very nice online comments in the last week from their involvement with him going way back to the 1970s, kind of impression that Quincy made on people. Because of the size and complexities of the file, Quincy and I acted wherever there were conflicts for the other two firms. There were indeed lots of conflicts, and we managed to keep our involvement going for 21 years. As Webby would describe, a dripping roast. Quincy loved to take on the banks, so the highlight of this file was a lawsuit we launched against the Bank of Montreal for $300 million, which was a pretty significant amount of money in 1980, and large enough that it required a note to their financial statements, which delighted Quincy and me. The law at the time was evolving to the effect that a lender had to give reasonable notice before it could appoint a receiver. In this case, they interrupted an Abacus board meeting to introduce Vern Morrison, who was a member of the club and well-known to Quincy and me, as the receiver. Ken Rogers, the infamous CEO of Abacus, said to the bank and to Mr. Morrison, "How much time do we have to pay?" The answer was none. It's too bad, it's too late. Quincy and I loved that line. We used it a lot. It's too bad, it's too late. Quincy crafted a great legal argument, and the case went all the way to the Supreme Court. I got to sit in the gallery and watch my pal make a very compelling argument, but unfortunately, we weren't successful. A lawyer acting for Abacus had signed a consent to the appointment of the receiver, primarily for administrative convenience, but it proved fatal to our case. The other big file we had was the principal group, but it only lasted 18 years. I got a call on the 10th tee here one day from a guy in our Edmonton office wondering if I was free to act. I finished the round, but went to Edmonton to meet with Don Cormie and some other senior people in the company and their lawyers. I didn't really expect anything to come of it, but it did, and it was happening right then. So Quincy and Susan had just left for Nanaimo to spend some time touring the Gulf Islands on their boat, Cindy Rocket. So I'm going to take a bit of a detour here because Cindy Rocket was an important part of Quincy and Susan's life. It was a diesel-powered boat named after the Stampede bucking horse because it behaved a lot like a bucking bronco, bouncing over the waves, and the diesel engine sounded like a bucking horse farting every time the rear end came out of the water. There are some fabulous trips on Cindy, many with our pals, several with Susan and Margie, and one I remember fondly with Dave Waddell and Andrew, who's here today, along with me and my two boys, Toby and Ward. Quincy made it a fabulous trip that our boys will remember forever. In any event, back to the principal bankruptcy. Quincy flew from Nanaimo to Edmonton, also thinking nothing much was likely to come from this because he didn't even bring a toothbrush with him. But we were there for a week of intense activity before we got a break. Quincy had to go shopping for shirts, underwear, and a toothbrush. The file was a big deal. There was lots of scrutiny by the media. It was front-page news for days. Quincy made some incredibly bold moves in that first week. In bankruptcy, you generally can't sell anything or make any deals until you have a creditors meeting and get permission of inspectors appointed by the creditors, which would have taken weeks. But we had an immediate opportunity to sell the principal mutual fund business to MetLife. The worry was that if we didn't move quickly, the value would diminish like a run on the bank. We also had negotiated a deal to access several of Don Cormie's assets that would have been beyond the reach of a bankruptcy trustee in settlement of an intercompany account receivable. This was also time sensitive, as there was fear that Cormie might change his mind, leave the jurisdiction, or move the assets further beyond our control. The most valuable asset was a bank in the Cayman Islands, which many people didn't think even existed. Quincy made an application to the court to allow us to enter into these deals. We were met with a barrage of complaints from lawyers for other creditors. We were accused of moving, the phrase that was used was indecent haste, by various lawyers as well as the media. People thought the mutual fund company was worth more than we were being offered, and they didn't believe we'd find anything of value in the Caymans. Quincy persevered, and we got the court orders. We were later told that MetLife believed they actually overpaid for the mutual fund asset. And Quincy and I traveled to the Caymans a couple of times, ultimately came home with a check for $23 million for the proceeds of the bank. There was a lot of opposition to these court applications, and they weren't straightforward issues. It was Quincy's legal skills, his credibility, and the respect in which he was held that led to our success in getting the court orders. We were under a great deal of pressure in the early days of the file. One day, Quincy concluded we needed a break. That would typically involve going to the bar, but we couldn't do that as we had a ton of work ahead of us, so we took a couple of hours off one afternoon to go to a James Bond movie. We also sued the province of Alberta for their failure to protect our creditors. They regulated two of the subsidiaries, while our company was unregulated, and only so-called sophisticated investors were able to store their money in our company. We argued that the province knew full well that the companies were in a financial mess, but they turned a blind eye to our company, which harmed our creditors. We pursued that lawsuit for years, but ultimately, with the able assistance of Webby McDonald and Derek Lloyd, we settled the action for $15 million. In his acceptance speech and being recognized as a distinguished alumni by the Calgary Board of Education, Quincy was asked to provide advice to the young students present. He commented on the importance of relationships and the significance of the relationships that one establishes in the public school system, which will form a solid foundation for one's life. That was definitely true for Quincy, as we've already noted. But in that particular speech, he referred to the work we did to save the Calgary Stampeders. The board chair of the Stampeders was Pat Peacock. Ward McLean, Diamond Jim Thompson, and Bob Dinning were also on the board, all friends from Central High School. Jerry Shaw and Doug Hunter, also buddies from high school, were trying to buy the club, but City Council refused to subsidize the rent for the stadium, so the deal fell apart. The club was therefore broke. There was a big bid drive to get season's tickets from under $10,000 up to $18,000 within a matter of a few weeks. We also compromised creditors' claims at 25 cents on the dollar. Given Quincy's love for the banks, his favorite was a brand new loan from the CIBC for $500,000, for which they recovered $125,000. The work we did for the football club was pro bono. We also worked on the same basis to rescue the Calgary Philharmonic. In this case, we worked closely with Larry Fichtner, not a high school buddy, but a longtime friend. Quincy and I had never been to the CPO, as many of you might imagine, but we recognized it as an important asset to the community. The file was particularly challenging, given the varied interests of the stakeholders, including management, the musicians union, volunteer directors, and patrons and season ticket holders. Once again, Quincy applied his unique talents and skills to resolving a myriad of challenges. One of the problems with the CPO was the orchestra played stuff they liked to play rather than what would please the audience and sell tickets. They had to change their business model, and in the restructuring, they agreed to do that. In fact, we convinced the union that they should be paid on an incentive based on ticket sales, which was quite foreign to them. The one and only time we went to a performance was after our work was completed, and Quincy, Susan, Margie, and I went to a concert where Ian Tyson performed with the orchestra. The tickets were complimentary as compensation for our services, and the concert was actually fantastic. For our work on this file, we also received honorary mention by the Turnaround Management Association North America for the Pro Bono Turnaround of the Year and an award of distinction by the National Post Awards for Business in the Arts. Stampede was a big part of Quincy's life, and there's many Stampede people here today. Quincy volunteered for and ultimately chaired the Courtesy Car Committee, and there's a myriad of stories that one could tell about the CCC, but we'll leave those for another time. He was subsequently elected to the Stampede Board. Quincy had a number of notable accomplishments as a Stampede director. As the first chair of the Governance Committee, he led the modernization of the Stampede's governance practices. One of those initiatives was diminishing the active involvement of past presidents and former directors with the governance of the organization. They used to have a seat at the board table and could speak to and influence decisions on various issues. Quincy succeeded in moving the coots and rails, as he called them, to a separate table and limited their opportunity for interference. My term on the board overlapped with Quincy by 2 years, and by this time the coots and rails were hardly ever showing up for meetings, which was exactly Quincy's objective. Quincy also initiated the audit committee for the Stampede, which was highly effective and became an important part of Stampede governance. Another of the really significant seeds that Quincy planted in our community was the Calgary Stampede Foundation. This was Quincy's brainchild, and he set it up with the assistance of Brian Fileski. The idea was to provide an opportunity to attract community leaders to be part of the Stampede without them having to spend years working through the volunteer system. As well, the intent was obviously to raise philanthropic dollars for Stampede projects and programs. Thanks to the creation of the foundation, Stampede raised $120 million in its 100th anniversary in 2012 for park expansion and program development. Stampede's youth programs are second to none. Stampede Band and the Young Canadians programs aren't just focused on teaching kids music or the arts. Their most important goal is to develop good humans. The foundation also oversees school programs that educates thousands of kids each year on Calgary's history, the importance of agriculture, and our Western heritage. Kids are learning about the sorts of values that the Stampede stands for and which Quincy possessed in spades: honesty, integrity, neighborliness, a love of the land, and our can-do entrepreneurial spirit. Foundation office has advised me that donations are pouring in to honor Quincy's memory. Thank you. It is indeed a good cause, and one that really builds on something that Quincy loved and which he initiated. Some years after Quincy left the board, Stampede was building the new casino building on 12th Avenue and entered into a partnership agreement with another casino operator. Quincy designed a structure to protect the casino building and the casino license in case things went south with the operation. No one really expected that to happen. Everybody told us that we couldn't lose with the casino. But it opened at the same time as the smoking bylaw came into effect in Calgary, and that didn't apply to the Grey Eagle Casino. So the Stampede Casino did wind up in receivership. But thanks to Quincy, the building and the casino license were preserved. And while not a board initiative, Quincy also added to the fun and spirit of the chuck wagon races. For several years, he got his firm to sponsor a wagon called the Lawyers. A year or so later, we created the Accountants, followed by the Clients a year or so after that. I don't recall who prevailed, but it added to the fun and excitement, and no doubt led to greater revenues for the tarp auction. For all his support and commitment over 8 years on the Stampede Board, Quincy was made an honorary life director of the Stampede. But speaking of raising money to benefit the community, Quincy was always a huge supporter of the United Way. And while managing partner of FMC, he ensured that the lawyers and staff participated fully and donated significantly to the annual campaign. His long-time support led to him being appointed, along with Shannon Bowen-Smed, to lead the annual campaign in 2005. That campaign that year raised a record $40 million. Quincy also served in the United Way Board of Directors for several years. In Quincy's memory, the United Way wrote, "Quincy's unwavering dedication, compassion, and leadership as a generous donor, and former co-chair, made a lasting impact on our mission and the lives of countless individuals we serve. Quincy was more than a supporter. He was a champion of hope and progress. His legacy will continue to inspire us and guide our work for years to come. The YW Calgary posted a note recently in Quincy's memory. Quincy was a longtime friend and supporter of YW Calgary. Quincy's dedication to women and their families was long-standing, and he demonstrated that at YW when he took on the role of Transformation Campaign Co-Chair in 2017 to support the completion of YW's new home in their hub facility. He will be forever part of our history. Travel Alberta is another big part of Quincy's story. I was in China in 2008 between the Olympics and the Paralympics, representing the Canadian Tourism Commission. Cindy Adey, who's here today, was representing Alberta as Minister of Tourism. She had just successfully advanced legislation to establish Travel Alberta as a Crown corporation. She mentioned to me that she now had to populate the board. She was looking for a board chair. I told her I'd give it some thought. That night I woke up at about 3 o'clock in the morning and thought Quincy Smith would be the perfect candidate. He was winding down his practice. He had great governance skills, incredible interpersonal skills, and had intimate knowledge of the importance of tourism through his involvement with the Stampede, the time he spent in the mountains, and his own extensive travels. He was perfect. Cindy agreed, and Quincy became the first chair of Travel Alberta. One of the original directors of Travel Alberta commented, Quincy's skill, governance, knowledge, and vision was a perfect fit for the startup of the Crown Corporation. Quincy was absolutely the right guy at the right time. The province owes him a debt of gratitude. The first official, the CEO of Travel Alberta, commented, Quincy was absolutely perfect as the first board chair. I learned much from him as we recruited the first board and got the organization off to a flying start. I admired his style as a chair, and following his approach has served me so well in my career. One of the early Travel Alberta executives said, for all that Quincy did for Travel Alberta and the community at large, he never boasted or bragged about it. He just got it done. A pragmatist with a fantastic dry sense of humor, I count Quincy as one of the handful of people who took the time to provide me with valuable advice as I was building my career. Quincy joined the board of Calgary Economic Development same time as I did. One of his key roles was to also serve on the board of the fledgling Calgary Film Centre. Film Centre was under development when we arrived on the scene. The province had provided a grant to develop the Film Centre, but it was inadequate. The enterprise ended up with a big debt that they couldn't service because the province also hadn't created a competitive incentive regime for the industry. So it was another perfect assignment for Quincy. The city ultimately took over the building, and the province fixed the incentive scheme, so the Film Centre eventually turned around. Quincy's wisdom and experience in dealing with challenging assets was invaluable. Quincy also served on the board of the Calgary Airport Authority and helped to guide it through the multi-million-dollar expansion, which resulted in the new international terminal. Also served on the board of the Glenbow Alberta Institute, was president of the Calgary Bar Association, and was a bencher for the Law Society of Alberta. I'm not as familiar with his role on those boards, but we talked about them often, and I know that he brought his common sense, his governance skills, his ability to deal with complex and challenging issues to those tables. Quincy and I were invited to join a bunch of insolvency practitioners from across Canada at an annual conference in the 1980s. It was usually held at some resort in the off-season, which had gone through receivership, and in some place that was always hard to get to. Quincy always groused about that, but once we got there, it was always fun. After several years of it being an informal event, it was formalized in the mid-1980s and became the Insolvency Institute of Canada. Quincy was involved in helping to create it and often made presentations and was involved in panel discussions. For his involvement, and by virtue of being one of Canada's leading insolvency lawyers, he was recognized as a fellow of the Insolvency Institute of Canada, one of only a few people so honored. As with most conferences, there was a fair amount of alcohol and late nights involved. Quincy didn't have a record of perfect attendance at various presentations or panels. And one year, Quincy was scheduled to be on a panel. I think he was supposed to be there. It was supposed to start at 10 o'clock. At 9:45, he was nowhere to be seen. I went to his room and woke him up. He managed to get there just in time and performed admirably. I mentioned that Quincy was recognized as the Calgary Board of Education Alumni of the Year, also received the Distinguished Service to the Community Award from the Canadian Bar Alberta Law Society, and was recognized with a Distinguished Alumni from the University of Alberta. When I was going through my notes of this tribute with Margie, she said, I'm not funny enough, which is true. But not many can match the wit and wisdom of Quincy Smith. When dealing with a grouchy lawyer on the other side or a creditor, he would set as his mission to get the guy to laugh, and he was most often successful. His manner and his humor were disarming. He could get people to see the humor in almost any situation. He told me about a time that a client was really upset about a situation and he wanted to sue somebody. I don't recall what the issue was, but Quincy told him he didn't have a case. There was no hope. The guy was incensed, so Quincy's advice to him was, if you really want to get back at the guy, sneak over to his house in the dark of night and let the air out of his tires. Quincy also never got mad. On the other hand, I would get upset and want to sue someone or take him to task. Quincy's strategy was, no, we're going to out-reasonable him, which was his term. He'd be calm, rational, and reasonable in either written or verbal communications, and 9 times out of 10, we'd get where we wanted to be. I only saw him get mad once. We were involved in a very stressful meeting with a national solvency guy from Coopers & Lybrand on the principal file. I don't remember what the issue was, but the guy could not be reasoned with. The tactic of out-reasonabling him was not working. So I won't tell you what he said, but as we were leaving the meeting, an exasperated Quincy clearly expressed our frustration. It stands out in my mind because it was the only time I saw him get mad other than hitting the occasional bad golf shot. It's also remarkable to me as I was writing this and reflected on it that in all our years together, we never did get into an argument or get mad at one another. Had lots of debates and discussions about various issues, but there was never a cross word spoken. Quincy and Susan and Margie and I shared many travel adventures, and I know there are many of you who traveled with Quincy and Susan on biking and ski trips around the world, including Agony tour trips organized by Jimmy and Ellen. And we could spend another hour recording stories from those trips, but I want to share just one story. Susan, Quincy, Margie, and I drove around the southern states in the early 1980s to visit the Deep South, but also to play a bunch of different golf courses. One night we were staying in the Grand Hotel on what Mr. Trump calls the Gulf of America. We were having a drink after dinner, and as often happened, Quincy and I decided to have one more beer, and the girls went off to bed. We were just across the bridge from Mobile, Alabama, which was not on our planned itinerary. But Q and I decided that since we were this close, we couldn't not take the short drive across the bridge to visit Mobile. So we got in the car and headed to Mobile looking for the nearest bar. We found a lively bar on the waterfront. I don't remember the name of it, but for purposes of this, we'll call it Harry's Bar. We dropped in for a beer, met a bunch of fun people, made a bunch of new friends, and got some advice on another bar that we should visit. So we got back in the car and headed off to try to find the other bar. We had to stop for gas, and there was a county sheriff at the gas station. So we asked him for directions to our next bar. Probably not that smart, but seemed like a good idea at the time. In any event, he discouraged us from going to that bar because it was too far away. So we asked him, well, where should we go? He gave us a couple of suggestions, but he said, whatever you do, there is really a tough crowd at a place called Harry's Bar on the waterfront. You definitely don't want to go there. Quincy and I had many similar adventures, and there may be some of you that would like to hear more of those stories. So I'm going to quote something from a speech that Quincy gave about me several years ago, which clearly implicates him, and I quote, I expect there are some in this room who would like me to elaborate on Steve's adventures when his alter ego is in control, mostly in the dark of the night that involved encounters with bartenders, bouncers, county sheriffs, police officers, dance hall ladies, and various other dark characters. When Steve's alter ego comes out, there's a great big grin, a ton of fun, and a ton of trouble. I don't claim to be just a dispassionate observer, and therefore, as a participant, in fact, generally an enthusiastic one, I am bound by the doctrine of what happens on the road stays on the road. I am therefore bound by the same doctrine. There have been numerous tributes to Quincy posted on the McGuinness and Holloway website and to LinkedIn posts by Travel Alberta and Blue Rock. I've also received some direct comments. I'm going to conclude my lengthy remarks, and I apologize for that, by reading excerpts of some of these comments which speak so well to what Quincy meant to so many of us. His laugh filled a room and was infectious. I worked on the opposite side of many insolvency files over the years. He was always courteous, well-prepared, and an excellent lawyer. I had great respect for him as a lawyer and a friend. I had the pleasure of working in the same department as Quincy for 20 years. He always treated everyone with respect and kindness. I enjoyed his company, his mentorship, and his respect for people. I will always remember Quincy's kindness and sense of humor. What a fine gentleman who did so much for his community. Few people leave an imprint that lasts a lifetime. Quincy did. Some people lead with vision, others with heart. Quincy led with both. His leadership was marked by integrity, compassion, and an unwavering belief in the people around him. He championed excellence with warmth and wit and treated those who worked beside him like family. We will remember him for his sharp mind, humor, generosity, and most of all, his humanity. A brilliant lawyer, a devoted community leader, and an athlete whose energy and spirit inspired so many. Beyond all his accomplishments, it was his kindness, integrity, and warmth that made him so loved. The term "a life well lived" most definitely applies to Quincy. I had the pleasure of working with him for over 30 years and stood in awe of his ability to balance a busy law practice with outstanding community service, all while mentoring young lawyers to be the best they could be. Quincy taught me so much about working with boards, governments, and leadership teams. He led with humor, patience, and an unwavering focus on progress. His influence continues to shape how I lead and collaborate today, and I'm deeply grateful to have learned from him. His wit, wisdom, and kindness will be dearly missed, but his contributions to our profession and our community will stand as his legacy. When I had the honor of supporting Quincy in some board meetings, I asked him why, as chair, he spoke very little. He told me that if he was doing his job, he didn't need to speak. Wise words in all aspects of life. A true gentleman, a consummate professional, and an inspiration to all who had the privilege of working with him. You can visit those websites and find out who made those comments, which were really wonderful. And I haven't identified the people, but in this case, I saw one today from Mayor Dave Bronconi. Quincy, a true community builder, a real gentleman in every sense of the word. We welcomed the 100th anniversary of the province together, a memory I will always cherish, and he posted a picture of the two of them together when they did that. So long, Quincy, you left such a legacy. This city is deeply grateful. One of the consistent themes, and I'm getting close to the end here, you'll be happy to know, about Quincy is his skill as a mentor. He had such an incredible influence on people, including me, that changed their lives. Many of the comments I've already touched on related to Quincy as a mentor, but there are a couple more for people who told me the enormously positive impact he had on them. And quote them, Quincy was the kind of mentor who could steady your hands without ever taking the proverbial golf club from you. He led through values, conviction, humility, humor, and grace. He never chased credit. He never sought applause. He simply carried weight for others quietly and with dignity. Quincy was extravagantly generous in his advice, guidance, experience, and mentoring of me as a young lawyer. He was kind and generous to me. He took an awkward, underconfident, insecure young person under his wing, both professionally and personally. I will never forget that kindness. He threw me in and stood back and watched and supervised. I sometimes floundered, I sometimes floated. Quincy's influence on me personally and professionally is immeasurable in the most profound and positive way. David Mann was Quincy's understudy, then his partner, then evolved to follow Quincy as a leader of the firm's insolvency practice, and is today one of Canada's leading insolvency lawyers. He is applying the mentoring skills he picked up from Quincy to help young lawyers grow, and he shares Quincy's sense of humor. He told me a few days ago, and this is not necessarily funny, but that if it weren't for Quincy, he probably wouldn't be practicing law today, which would be tragic because David is a great lawyer. But there's a bronze at the table in the entrance to this room. It was given to Quincy by David Mann and it speaks of Dave's sense of humor as well as his appreciation of Quincy as a mentor. It's a cowboy on horseback and an airplane wing and a propeller, which will strike you as being unusual. And it bears the inscription, "Part of my job," drawled the old sheriff, "is to keep you from walking into airplane propellers." There you have it. My own life would have been quite different if Quincy hadn't been with me for the entire journey. I'll be forever grateful for his guidance, his wisdom, his advice, and many adventures, many, many laughs, and most of all, a truly wonderful friendship. Quincy was indeed an incredible guy, a mentor to many, major contributor to this profession and our community, and a wonderful friend to all of us. His was indeed a life very well lived. There's a great picture on the memorial brochure of Quincy skiing, and as Susan said to me a few days ago, we hope you will all leave here today with visions of Quincy dancing through the powder on the ski hills of heaven. I don't have anything left in my glass, got a little bit of water, but raise a toast to our pal, Quincy Smith.